As a part of Play Your Role's continuing goal to connect with and grow the tabletop community, we'd like to introduce Eldritch Foundry. They're an absolutely incredible tool for customized miniatures, and if you want to make monsters, characters, or even just that perfect NPC, Eldritch Foundry can do wonders to help you achieve that. Right now, we're actually partnered with them to give you guys 15% off your order so long as you use the coupon code PLAYYOURROLE. If you've been waiting to get that perfect miniature, now's your chance, especially if you want to use it for a villain, because I think that's the most fun you could do. Anyways, enjoy the video. So, before I fully jump into the topic of the video, I want to address some things I saw in the last video I made about the Legend of Vox Machina. Now, this isn't going to be a chance for me to just be able to speak my mind and stick it to the commenters, but instead I want to talk about some really concerning things I saw that seem to be very consistent in the comments. Things that I think are really misguided or misconceived, and so I want to go ahead and address those and kind of just put it out there so that it is there for everybody to see. So, first thing I want to talk about is the concept that everybody seemed to be concerned that the Legend of Vox Machina would make D&D mainstream, and therefore would cause Wizards of the Coast to sell out. And the most common argument I saw about this was looking at AAA games. So many of those comments said, look at these game franchises and look at how they originally started, but now look at how they are because they've been bought out by AAA games, and now they're soulless and lifeless and they have microtransactions, and that's what's going to happen to D&D, yada yada yada. I thought that was a very interesting take, but I think it is very misguided. The thing to remember is that Dungeons and Dragons is not a video game. It's just not. There is nothing about D&D that is a video game because, think about it this way. If a AAA game studio buys a game and they start making those games and making them lifeless, you have no choice but to either play those games or just stop playing them. Those are your only two options, but Dungeons and Dragons is not a video game. You do not need a AAA studio to create those games. The game is pen, paper, dice, and your mind. It is all imagination and storytelling. Yes, they might release new and newer products with more different things, and they might change the business model, but it does not stop you from playing Dungeons and Dragons at your table. You don't need a studio to create it, you just need yourself. And you can always rely on the older products. Now, may support sort of leave those products? Sure, it is possible. But again, this is Dungeons and Dragons. We have the ability to homebrew, create, make whatever we want. There is a giant community based around it. So no, it is not the same as being sold out. Additionally, I don't think that's something you necessarily need to worry about. It doesn't make a lot of sense for D&D to sell out in that way. The market for tabletop games and video games is just too different. And if you want to argue with me on that, look at 4th edition. We saw what happened when those two tried to merge together. Didn't work so well. The other thing I want to address is how many people commented saying that I had no idea what I was talking about because I didn't realize that the show was not fully based on the pre-stream. It was the first 2 episodes that were pre-stream, and then we were right into the Briarwood arc. Okay, that's fair. I didn't know that. Amusingly though, in the exact same comments, there were a bunch of people saying that I was focusing too much on Critical Role, or talking too much, or caring too much about them, and I was becoming another typical Critical Role YouTuber. Well, first of all, my channel started with Critical Role. It's the first thing that got me off the ground, so not much of an argument. Additionally, with the over 100 videos I put out, less than 10% have been Critical Role videos. So I do need to address that. I also want to point out that if you are a D&D YouTuber who's going to talk about D&D outside of just mechanics, Critical Role is going to pop up. They are a huge part of the community, and they are driving the game into the new generation. And if you want to go ahead and say that I could ignore Critical Role, I could. I absolutely could. But why would I? They're such a huge part. They are a positive force, as much as people want to argue that. They constantly push for charities, they constantly push for inclusiveness, and they constantly try to make sure that everybody has access to D&D. That's a positive thing. So of course I would want to talk about them. But to go back to what I was initially saying there, all those comments were trying to say that I didn't know enough about the show but cared too much about Critical Role. That is very contradictory to each other. But to make it clear, yeah, I didn't know that it was going to be less pre-stream. When they initially started their Kickstarter and talked about it, they said it was going to be pre-stream, so that's what I assumed. And no, I was not so invested and so obsessed with Critical Role that I looked through every single email, every single announcement about the show. I liked the show, I followed its development loosely by watching the different character arts that they put out, but no, I was not just focused on it. And if you were focused on it, you're not wrong for doing so, that's okay. But for all the people who are saying that I was too obsessed with it but didn't know enough about it, it does sort of ring a concerning amount of criticism towards the show itself. And it really just comes down to Critical Role has become big enough that people think it's cool to hate on it. Now, are there things that you should dislike about it and criticize about it? Absolutely. And I will do so in this video. You should criticize things. You should not just accept them because, oh, they're so cool. That does not create a good product or community. But don't just hate on it for the sake of hating on it. I think that's very harmful and really convinces people not to get into the D&D sphere, which if you are constantly talking about D&D dying because it's becoming too popular, you could also go the other end and kill it because you don't want anybody else to join it. It is a fine balance. Let's keep the community open and available. Now, was this a large portion of the video? Yeah, sure, but I do have a lot to talk about the general portion of The Legend of Vox Machina. So we're gonna ignore the let's talk about that. I've already talked too long. We're not doing the intro, right into the video. The first 3 episodes of The Legend of Vox Machina are out at the time of recording this video, and I watched them. And I'm going to talk about my initial thoughts and if it lived up to my expectations. Short answer, yes. It absolutely did. I think the show is fantastic. From the voice acting to the production, the animation, the storytelling, the writing, it is all so tight and amazing. And they even managed to keep in those little bits of, winks and nods towards the Critical Role community and the D&D community that brings it all together without isolating everybody. It really created an amazing environment for people who know nothing about D&D and who want to watch the show, and for people who have been following Critical Role from the beginning and want to see this animated. It was absolutely incredible. And I think they did an amazing job of being able to bring their D&D game into a more cohesive story.
The realm of mystery, of magic, of marvel. Welcome to Gilmore's Glorious Goods!
They did make a lot of changes, and I am very thankful for it. One, they did write out the character of Tiberius. We all knew that was going to happen, understandable. I will say no more on it. I respect their decision. But they also wrote in another character, Pike. For a lot of the portion of the show, she is in there, well, she was not in the game. And that's understandable. Pike was not at the table because Ashley Johnson could not be. She was starring in Blindspot, or Blindside, or shoot, what was that show called? One of those. But she was starring in that, so she couldn't be at the table. Totally understandable. What did they do? They wrote her temporarily out of the story, but in the show, they made sure to put her there because she was an integral part and it was important for the audience to learn about her. Awesome. Absolutely loved it. A few other things that they did was they made sure to go ahead and actually put some important emphasis on some of the character abilities that they wouldn't necessarily have access to yet because of their level. They went ahead and made sure they weren't following directly D&D mechanics because it didn't make sense for the storytelling, and I honestly really appreciate it. Seeing Keyleth cast that wall, or seeing Pike cast what I assume was a holy weapon.
Oh no. Hold on, Grog!
You're the best, Mike.
Didn't have to make sense. No, they wouldn't have been able to cast that at the level they were currently at that stream, but I still think it was fantastic and wonderful, and I loved seeing it. Being able to see those iconic D&D abilities was amazing, but they also made sure to go out of their way to create those abilities into what they wanted to be iconic abilities for the characters. Pike apparently has this spiritual shield that she constantly uses. Nothing really like that exactly matches what happened in the game, but it works really well for her character, and they continue to emphasize that. I especially particularly like how they handled Vex. They handled Vex's ranger abilities and her favorite foe ability perfect. They brought a sort of uniqueness to it and didn't create just this general vague vibe of what the ranger usually has, but they made it distinct for her character and for the show so that the audience watching knew what was happening without having to know anything about D&D. And that really is the core of what I think made the show so great. Because one of the things that they focused on was making sure that the D&D mechanics were there for the fans who are fans of it, but they also made sure that the mechanics could be understood by anybody who is watching the show outside of it. And that really is an important part of why this show works, where other D&D products wouldn't. A lot of people on my previous video asked me, well, haven't you ever heard about this show or this thing that was inspired by a D&D campaign, or haven't you ever heard of Harmon Quest? First of all, I did put a mention of Harmon Quest in the video. It was a small text box, but it was in there, so the amount of people asking if I had ever heard of it, yes, I have. But for every single show that they mentioned, where they said, didn't you know this was based on a D&D campaign? Yes, it was based on a D&D campaign. But this show has an integral D&D campaign. It's not, oh, we based it on it. We got to see these things happen in live stream. Hi, Jay from the future, and because I know it's going to be brought up, yes, technically we did see the things on Harmon Quest happen in real time, but it was not a TV show. At least not in the sense of Legend of the Vox Machina. It was not a cohesive, curated storyline. It was still just a D&D campaign. The Legend of Vox Machina is a D&D campaign that is created into a firm, well-established show. While at the same time, we still got to see the live streams beforehand. It is unique because I don't think that there is any other show with quite that experience. Anyways, back to the video. Which means they have to be able to translate it to the screen as we remember it. They have to make sure that it works as we want it to and as we saw it on the stream, while also working for a general audience. And that's what makes this show so different. And they really did a fantastic job of doing it. But with all these praises aside, I did have some problems with the show. Now, it's not going to be me just complaining about it. It's not going to be me complaining for the sake of complaining. It's criticism for the general point of pointing out that while this show is incredible, it's not perfect. Nothing is, and it's important to realize that. One of the main issues that I have with the show is some of the D&D references were really wink and nod and were good and in the background, but a few of them really stood out as I couldn't help but think if I didn't know anything about D&D or this show or this stream, that would have confused the hell out of me. Specifically, I'll go ahead and point out the first time we see Grog really rage. Fantastic, amazing scene. I got chills, I loved it, the animation is incredible, but when I rewatched it later, I couldn't help but think that would be really confusing to me as an outside audience. Now, is this nitpicky? Yeah, just a little bit. But as he sits there and buckles down and says, you have to consider that would be a very strange thing for a character to say in any other show. And while I think it was perfect for them to put it in there, it does make it clear that while this show is amazing at bringing in an outside audience, it's not going to be perfect. And it's never going to be perfect. I want to point that out because in the future, when we see more things like that, I want us to be aware of it so that we can continue to bring people into the community by explaining it instead of berating them for not understanding it. Now, it may be a little cynical for me to assume people will do that, but let's be honest, critter community, we're pretty gatekeepy at times. Now, with that being said, those moments were far and few between, and I really did ultimately enjoy the show. I really enjoyed the way that they handled it, the way that they translated that D&D game to the screen without taking too much away of what actually made that stream the stream. They've really done a fantastic job of it, and the voice acting is amazing. I also particularly loved being able to see Matt Mercer as animated characters in different parts of the episodes. That was really fun. But ultimately, what are my main thoughts on the show? I think the show's amazing. I really hope it sticks the landing. They really did a good job in the first 3 episodes, but they have some big shoes to fill, which I know they're aware of. They're moving into the Briarwood arc. And the Briarwood arc is one of the quintessential and most liked arcs in the entire series. Why is that? Well, it's one of the earliest ones, so it's one where most people saw before dropping off, and it was just really well handled and done. They have a lot to be able to live up with this. I think they're going to do amazing, but if they don't stick the landing, it could really harm the show. If they don't really translate this well to both audiences, the critter community and those outside of it, it could be nah. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying they just refuse to support the show for a lot of different reasons, and you are fully within your right to do that. But I do want you to consider that this is a show made of love. It is a show made for the community. It has been well crafted and really poured a lot into it. And I think that the Critical Role cast and their company can do a lot with the show to be able to build up the D&D community. But with that, there will come negativity. There will come haters. I'm sure you can look down in the comments and find them now. It is almost assured. But don't let that negativity be unreasonable. Think it through. Create constructive criticism, not negative criticism, because it doesn't help anything and it doesn't grow things. I know the more this show goes and the more it gets popular, as it hopefully does, more people will hate on it. Hating is not okay. Disliking and creating a reason as to why and thinking that through absolutely is. And I encourage you to do that for me too. If you don't like my videos, let me know why. I do read the comments, even though sometimes it's painful. So, hopefully all my thoughts made sense and you enjoyed my rambling. Go out into the world and make it your own, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to have a great day, and never forget to play a role. A huge shout out to all those divine bastards over on our Patreon that helped make this video happen. I'd also like to take an additional very personal thank you to BKBW, Diet Blue, Duplicolor, Malkadil, I hope I pronounced that right, Sassy Productions, Sorit, Supreme Court, Tinai, and Void Mystic. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without our patrons, and we are very thankful for your continued support. You guys are the absolute best, and I will never take your support for granted.